Hey friends, Mrs. Stevens here. I am so excited to be doing Shared Read with you for the next couple of weeks. So hopefully you got your Ivy and Bean book in the mail, and hopefully you also loved Ivy and Bean as much as I did when we read it in school. So Mrs. Thornton and I even dressed up as Ivy and Bean for Halloween, and our class was a whole bunch of wizards and witches, just like in the story. So really excited about this. We're going to follow the same format that we would in school, okay? So we're going to learn a new vocabulary word, we're gonna get our brains thinking a little bit, we're going to dive into our chapter, and then after we read, we're going to do a graphic organizer together, and we're also going to do some comprehension questions, okay? Now I also hope that you have someone there with you. If you don't, that's okay too, but we are going to pause after we read it together so that you can either read it on your own or you can read it with someone else that's there with you, just like when we would partner read in class, okay? So I hope we're ready. Today is chapter 1. Our vocabulary word today is relationships. And you can have good and bad relationships, but what it means is that you have a connection with somebody. So it is a noun. If you have a good relationship, then you are going to be getting along with that person, maybe your classmates, maybe your friends, maybe your family. And if it would not be a good relationship, then you might say that they're your enemy and that you don't get along. Okay, so think about our story. We know that Ivy and Bean, they end up creating a really good relationship, but it doesn't necessarily start out as a good relationship. Okay, all right, so books in front of you and chapter 1. Okay, chapter 1 is called No Thanks. While we're reading, I want you to think a little bit about how we would describe Ivy and Bean, what we learn about them in this first chapter. Okay, we're going to think about their character traits. Okay, so no thanks. Before Bean met Ivy, she didn't like her. Bean's mother was always saying that Bean should try playing with the new girl across the street. But Bean didn't want to. She's 7 years old, just like you, said her mother, and she seems like such a nice girl. You could be friends. I already have friends, said Bean, and that was true. Bean did have a lot of friends, but really, she didn't want to play with Ivy because her mother was right. Ivy did seem like such a nice girl. Even from across the street, she looked nice. But nice, Bean knew, is another word for boring. Ivy sat nicely on her front steps. Bean zipped around her yard and yelled. Ivy had long, curly red hair pushed back with a sparkly headband. Bean's hair was black, and it only came to her chin because it got tangled if it was any longer. When Bean put on a headband, it fell off. Ivy wore a dress every day. Bean wore a dress when her mother made her. Ivy was always reading a big book. Bean never read big books. Reading made her jumpy. Bean was sure that Ivy never stomped in puddles. She was sure that Ivy never smashed rocks to find gold. So I'm trying to form an image in my head about Ivy and Bean, and I'm picturing Ivy to be very quiet, nicely dressed, and always with her head in a book. And I'm picturing Bean to be a little more wild and loud. It's really important that while we read, we try to picture what the author is telling us. She was sure that Ivy had never once in her whole life climbed a tree and fallen out. Bean got bored just looking at her. So when her mother said she should play with Ivy, Bean just shook her head. No thanks, she said. You could give it a try. You might like her. said Bean's mom. All aboard! Next train for Boring is leaving now, yelled Bean. Her mother frowned. That's not very nice, Bean. I was nice. I said no thanks, said Bean. I just don't want to, okay? Okay, her mother sighed. Have it your way. So for weeks and weeks, Bean didn't play with Ivy. But one day, something happened that changed her mind. So that was it for chapter 1 for today. And I wonder if you can remember what it was that happened that changed her mind. What I want you to do now is turn back to the very beginning, okay, of No Thanks. And I want you to either read the chapter again on your own, or I want you to read it together with someone that's there with you, maybe a brother, sister, grandma, grandpa, mom, dad, whoever it may be, and read it together, just like you would in class, okay? So you can go ahead, pause the video, so you can read it, and then when you're all done, hit play again. Okay, so hopefully you were able to go ahead and reread chapter 1, either on your own or with somebody else. And now it is time for our bonus questions. So bonus questions is what I call them in my room. And usually if you're participating, you earn a dojo point. But we obviously can't give out dojo points right now. So if you get it right, I want you to just give yourself a kiss to the brain, give yourself a hug, high five, a squeeze, whatever it is so that you know you did a great job, okay? So the first question has to do with character traits. How are Ivy and Bean different? So first I want you to think about how they look different. That's an easier one because we did have some picture clues. Okay, you should be thinking, just like on the cover, that Ivy has her long curly red hair, she wears headbands, she always wears a dress, and then that Bean has short black hair, and we know that Bean never wears dresses, and she can't wear a headband, okay? So now how do they act different? Okay, you should be thinking again. Cover gives us a clue. We know that Ivy is quiet and shy, and we know that she loves to read big books, while Bean is kind of the opposite. She's loud and wild, and we know that she doesn't like to read big books, okay? She would rather be outside playing and getting messy and dirty, okay? Now, the last question is just like the one that we would do. This is the one that came in your packet, okay? And right here, I know it's backwards on the screen, but it says chapter 1. And why do you think Bean's mother wanted her to be friends with Ivy? Okay, so this is just like the question that we would have in our workbook when we had small groups. All right, so why do you think Bean's mother wanted her to be friends with Ivy? Right? So that's what I want you to do for your written response. If you do this part, then be sure to take a picture of it, send it to your teacher. You can put it on in their messages as a picture, or you can put it in your portfolio, okay? That way we know what you're up to. All right, so the last thing that we're gonna do is look at our graphic organizer. Now for Ivy and Bean, we did a few different graphic organizers. Towards the end of the book, we did our character traits. So that's what we're gonna do again towards the end of the book. And during the beginning of the story, we're going to work on a story map. So that's where we're going to have our characters, our setting, events, problem, and solution. Now, you don't have this graphic organizer at home yet, but you will next week, okay? So for this week, just follow along with what I have, and then next week when you get yours, you can go ahead and fill in that information on your own graphic organizer. So here's our graphic organizer: characters, settings, problem, solution, and then events. I've only filled in one of our parts, and that's because in the next chapter, we're going to get a little more detailed And I'm gonna wait until then to fill out our setting and our first event. So the characters, we have Ivy, Bean, and then Bean's mom. Now, one thing I do wanna talk about is that Ivy and Bean, they would be our main characters. Those characters are who the story is all about. Now, the rest of the characters that come are going to be more so a supporting character. And what that means is that they are supporting the main characters. They may not be in the story as much, and when they are, they're usually interacting with the main characters. Okay, so right now, one of our supporting characters would be Bean's mom. All right, so that would be it for today's lesson. You did a wonderful, wonderful job, and I hope to see you again on Wednesday for chapter 2. All right, I'll see you then. Bye.